Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Bonnie Brzezowski. I'm a public services librarian at the Corvallis-Benton County Public Library. I want to welcome you to the event tonight, Imagining Mary's Peak. This is the third and final in the 2024 Liz and Bob Frankel Environment and Hiking Spring Webinar Series, where we're going to talk about the future of the peak. The theme for this year's Sprinkle series, as you might have guessed, is Mary's Peak. So we've been learning all about this beautiful local backdrop. There are two other virtual events in addition to this one that were part of the series that have already occurred, but I'd like to tell you briefly about them, and I'm going to provide you some links to the recordings of these events in the chat. So the first event of the series was on Thursday, March 14th. It was titled Mary's Peak Transformed. We learned how human activities over the past 200 years have already transformed the physical, ecological, and cultural resources of Mary's Peak. And we also learned a lot about who this mysterious Mary might be. You can watch that video at the link that I'm going to share shortly, if I can be coordinated enough to do it and find the place to send it to you all. Here we go. And there you go. So there's that first recording for the first event. And then let me tell you about our second event in the series, which we had on Thursday, April 11th. That one was titled Transforming Mary's Peak. We learned about the current projects transforming Mary's Peak. You can watch that video at the link that I will share right now. Here we go. And there that one is. All right. So as I'm sure you've noticed, we're using Zoom tonight. Please feel free to submit questions throughout the presentation, and we will try to answer some of those at the end. To submit a question, you usually click or tap on the question mark to submit your questions. I'm going to go ahead and hand it over now to Dave Eckert. He's the program chair for the Mary's Peak group of the Sierra Club. He's going to tell us more about the series, our series co-sponsors, and our wonderful presenters. So Dave, would you like to take it away?
Yes, and let me bring up my, Bonnie, tell me when it's full screen. Let's see. Okay, we got full screen now?
There it goes. Yep.
Okay, thank you
Looking
very
good.
much. Okay, what does Imagining Mary's Peak mean? Well, what do you want it to mean? That's what we're going to try to figure out. We're developing a interpretation program for Mary's Peak, and we're sort of imagining what Mary's Peak actually is, and we have to talk about that. And this is a plan in process. So what you're hearing tonight is essentially where we are now, and we have a ways to go before, and we will need input from partners, you, and everybody to know where this is going to go on helping people perceive Mary's Peak and protect Mary's Peak. So we are in the land of Chimpinafu, and that's the land as it's been called for millennia by the Ampinafu Kalapuya, and Mary's Peak is a portion of that. And it's essentially the areas of Corvallis flowing with all around the Marys River, from Mary's Peak all the way down to the Willamette. And so we're honoring them. And the Kalapuya live throughout the Willamette Valley, but also at the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde and the Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians. This series is the Liz and Bob Frankel Hiking Environmental Spring Lecture Series. And Bob and Liz were really very strong personalities that were instrumental in saving and protecting many places, including Mary's Peak, around Western Oregon, the Pacific Northwest, and throughout the United States. He was the scientist and Liz was the lobbyist, and what a team they were. And we are greatly indebted to them. We have 3 sponsors for this program. This was founded by the Mary's Peak group of the Sierra Club, and its primary sponsor, the Corvallis-Benton County Public Library, came on board. I believe Bonnie was in 2021 and has been just such a wonderful co-sponsor. And they actually co-sponsored before that, before we went webinar, when we would hold all of our programs at the library. So they go back a long way with us. And then for this season, the Mary's Peak Alliance is on board as a co-sponsor because we're talking about Mary's Peak. And this series was started as a webinar series in 2021. The first one, which you can get on YouTube now on the library channel, was about the gift series, where the Frankls left money for restoring Jackson Fraser wetlands, Mary's Peak, and the Bald Hill Natural Area. So we have three YouTube webinars on that. The second year was on Beaverlis, about the beavers in Corvallis and really around the world. And we had 3 wonderful series on that, going from the local to the global. And then last year, it was reviving the wetland series, and we focused on 3 Willamette Valley wetlands and how they've been revived over the last few decades and to being very thriving ecosystems. And this year, of course, is transforming Mary's Peak. This is a picture that shows the peak from what is now near the parking lot, what it looked like in 1910, and then all of a sudden 2016, where you can't even see the peak anymore. So it's been transformed, and it's all human related. As Bonnie said, the first one was on Mary's Peak Transformed, which means how has it been transformed in the last 170 years by humans? And then the second one, Transforming, what's happening right now on Mary's Peak this year and next year. Real programs that are in place, and they are in fact transforming Mary's Peak. So I hope you look at that. Remember, that's Bonnie said that's on the chat if you want the link to it, both of those. And tonight we have Imagining Mary's Peak, and this is an early draft of where we might be putting some interpretive displays if that passes muster on the final approval process. So tonight we have 3 speakers. Julia Johannes is with the National Forest, as well as Matt Ramich, who's with the Siuslaw National Forest. And then I'll be presenting also, following this introduction, representing the Mary's Peak Alliance on the interpretation plan. And as Bonnie said, please put your questions in. When any of us are talking, if you come up with a question, put it into the Q&A. Do not put it into the chat. Put it into the Q&A, and we will do our best to answer your questions at the end. So go ahead and do that whenever the question strikes you. What is interpretation? We talk about interpretation. We're not talking about changing languages, one from, English to Kalapuya or Kalapuya to English. What we're talking about is interpretation. It is engagement activities that connect people, and in this case, with Mary's Peak. So whenever we use the word interpretation, and with Mary's Peak, we're saying what kind of engagement activities can we connect people with Mary's Peak? And there's many different formats for interpretation. Just a few of them are, you can give a presentation, you can have a physical display, you can have educational programs of any kind, you can have educational materials like publications, like being held, you can see the poster that's being held in Stuart's hand there in the picture. Or you can have virtual media, an app or a website or anything like that. And there's many, many other forms of interpretation. And so what kind of interpretation has the Mary's Peak Alliance done? We started in 2014 because we wanted to do interpretation on Mary's Peak. There had been interpretation for many, many decades. And then during the 2000s, it sort of stopped. So we tried to bring it back again. And one of the ways is through student field trips. We take over 500 students up to Mary's Peak every end of every spring, and have designated tours and with interpretive guides. We have interpretive guides that we train, get their special vests that you can see there. And they may be up there just wandering around. And if you have questions, you can ask them, but also we lead tours up there whether it's school kids or whether it's a private organization or whatever. So we take people to Mary's Peak, or we meet them there, really. And we've given a lot of presentations. We stopped with the pandemic. We want to get going again, but we gave a lot of presentations at All World Deli on just every subject you can imagine around Mary's Peak. And the rooms were always packed with people drinking beer, eating food. We also sponsor Art Send Mary's Peak, where we take artists of many different types of formats of artistry up and show them the different cultural, ecological, and physical wonders of Mary's Peak. And then they go back and produce art. And here on the right is one of the pieces of art. It's actually 4 feet tall, and it's now sitting in the library on the 2nd floor. You can go see it. We also have either sponsored or inspired. In really most cases, we've inspired publications that have given us credit for that. On these 4 right here, you can see. And we produced a video in 2020 with the onset of the pandemic when we couldn't take people up there. And you can look at it on Vimeo right now, Vimeo, or it's on YouTube. Just type in Mary's Peak Field Trip. And there's a lot of other Mary's Peak stuff will come up, but it's Mary's Peak Field Trip 2020. It's a 1-hour video. It's pretty good. And we have other webinars that we've put on too through this series and other series that we've made sure that talk about Mary's Peak. So all of that was kind of, I don't want to say chaotic, but we just did whatever we could think of to do interpretation. There was no plan. There hasn't been a plan. We just did things. But phase 1 began after Bob and Liz passed away, and they left us a little bit of money to work with the Forest Service to develop an organized and sustainable interpretation plan that's not, based on just having a few passion spirits around leading it, but to really make it ingrained in the culture. And so it started with that gift. And then step 2 was a memorandum of understanding between the Mary's Peak Alliance of Ephrata with the Forest Service, particularly the Siuslaw National Forest. That really started the whole thing back in September of 2019. And the first thing that we did then was we held a convening, and we put out the word to many organizations and agencies that had and tribal entities that had some interest in that we were aware of in Mary's Peak. And we got replies from 20 of the people we reached, the groups we reached out to. 20 of them responded and agreed and had the time to attend a convening meeting in Philomath at their city hall. And you can look at this list. It's pretty extensive. Tribally, property owners, interested organizations, and at least one business that was a property owner. And we had an incredible time convening. I'm not going to go into it. It was a special way of leading a meeting to ensure you're getting everybody's input and without interruption. And we had a big document that came back from that said what people's interests were in having some kind of an interpretation plan, what they would like to get out of it, and what they would like to put into it. And so that was in September 2019, very successful. So we learned about needs and concerns, content, and participation. And we decided that from this document that a purpose of the plan would be to achieve shared goals. Here's a wonderfully old picture of the summit before it was covered with trees and with the ski, lines of how the skiers went down into the snow. That there are many different reasons people use and love and protect Mary's Peak. and we wanted to make sure that everything we did achieved shared goals amongst all the partners. And we also, we have a lot of people who tell a lot of stories about Mary's Peak, and some of them are true, whether it's cultural or ecological or physical. And but we wanted to have a series of storylines that are well considered and really articulated well. And here's one of our interpretive guides on the left doing so to some students and leader one of these storylines. And we wanted to make sure that the story connects the audience to Mary's Peak, and that there's a real connection in that story. It's not just telling a story. It makes them inspired to love and protect Mary's Peak. And so that leads into general public appreciation and support for Mary's Peak. There's Greg Archuleta from the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Run sitting on the table and talking about the cultural values of Mary's Peak. And with that public appreciation, there is more support and greater protection. And it really inspires the property owners, such as the BLM and the Forest Service and OSU and Starker Forest, to really say, wow, we have something special here. And it really also looks at establishing design guidelines. I just pulled this picture off the website, a website. It's not a design guideline that's been looked at. But when we have displays or virtual, whatever we do, this should have a design guideline. And so I hate to say branding, but that gives a look to Mary's Peak. And we want community support with mutually beneficial relationships. Here's a talk that was done on lichens, and almost everybody in this room had no idea about Mary's Peak being one of the greatest places in the world to go to see lichens and the diversity and the density of lichens. And there are hot spots to see this. And people were so excited. And it develops not only community support, but mutually beneficial relationships with the ecology, with people, with the organizations, and with the property owners. And that is a goal as I moved over to goals. We also want to promote shared stewardship with community partners. Here's our first, this is the first year that we did this field trips, and we gathered people from all kinds of organizations to be interpretive guides. And everybody was excited to meet each other because they've all heard of each other, but didn't know each other. And that's what we want to really do, is really develop that all the community partners are working together as one whole rather than one organization leading, and that will be exciting. Another goal is develop before we talked about articulating storylines, but we need to develop guidelines that are consistent and accurate and engaging with people. So if they're not accurate, that's a problem. And so we want to really do the research to make sure what we're saying about the plants and the people and the physical aspects are true. And we have to create more informed and engaged visitors. We want people coming to Mary's Peak to know how important this is, to really appreciate it, and as a place of wonder. And that takes interpretation. And we want to inspire conservation. And so if we're not inspiring conservation, we kind of miss the boat. So that is a definite final goal. So we have to have themes. A theme, we had an overarching, now when I say purposes and goals and themes, remember, this is not finalized. We need your input on these. You may have other purposes, you may have other goals. And what I'll be mentioning as themes, these are just basic overarching themes, and we want your input because that's the only way this is going to work, if everybody who knows a thing or two gives input. But we are first in phase one. our draft primary theme was Mary's Peak as a treasured landscape and powerful cultural symbol. Now, to get that small phrase took a long time because we want to get everything wrapped into this one theme. But then we had subject themes. We came up with 4 that try to, to go under that primary theme. And you're going to you'll see some consistency here. That Mary's Peak is a physical island in the sky with a commanding influence over the region. Now, Bob Lilly wrote a wonderful book called Oregon's Island in the Sky, and he's talking about Mary's Peak, and that's what inspired us. But for this one theme, it's a physical. It's like the physicality, the topography, the geology, the hydrology, the atmosphere. It's a very special and unique place that is not replicated anywhere else. And it has, in fact, a commanding influence over this region, whether we consciously realize it or not. And it has for millennia. Number 2, here's a consistency. Mary's Peak is an ecological island in the sky with rare plant, fungal, and animal communities that attract scientists and visitors. Again, I'm not talking about the individual plant or the individual fungus or the individual animal, but the fact of how they come together as a community is quite rare. And people do come from all over the world who are, especially scientists, to see this. And we want people to know this who come up there. It's also, well, number 3, it's an iconic cultural symbol that defines our region and influences the lives of those around it, around Mary's Peak. And it has been since, as David Harrelson, who's in this picture, said, since time immemorial. And it's in the Kalapuya language, contrary to what other things have been said culturally, locally, in the non-Indigenous world, the Kalapuya name for Mary's Peak is Chantamanwi, and that's according to the linguists of the Confederated Tribes, the Grand Ronde. So this cultural symbol is very critical to the whole story. And finally, it's a treasured landscape that instills a desire to protect this land and its legacy. And that you're looking at a lichen heaven right there. It's one of the hot spots of lichens on Mary's Peak. So phase 1, we came up with a lengthy document. And but it was a draft document that didn't have any specifics to it, but it was a lot of pages to it and a lot of maps and things like that to give background. Went on hiatus for a while with a lot of a combination of the pandemic and a lot of staff changes at the Forest Service. And now everything seems to be getting back on track. And Julia Johannes, who's the interpretive specialist at the Siuslaw National Forest, will talk with you about phase 2. Take it away, Julia.
Thanks so much, Dave. Let me get my screen shared here real quick. All right, everybody see that? Great, awesome.
Great.
Thanks so much, Dave, for that introduction. So as Dave mentioned, my name is Julia Johannes. I'm the interpretive specialist for Siuslaw National Forest. I've actually been working on the Siuslaw since 2021, but I am new in this position. And I'm very excited to be working on this project and bringing it back to life. So when I first was given this project, there were sort of 2 goals that I was that I've been tasked to accomplish. Part 1 involved reviewing and revising and updating that initial draft that Dave and Brian Hay, my predecessor, had developed. And part of that includes re-engaging with our tribal partners, as well as re-engaging with community members, because a lot has changed since 2019, and we want to make sure that we're incorporating all of those changes and making sure that we're solidifying our themes and interpretive priorities. So finishing the actual document is one goal. And then the other goal that would happen at the same time was identifying different projects that could begin to be implemented while the document was being finished. And this is to help breathe some life back into the project and get the ball rolling. So today for my portion of the presentation, I'm going to start with introducing some of the big general areas that have been outlined in the current draft of the document as possible sites for interpretation. I'll also talk a little bit about how those sites tie into some of those primary subject themes. We're not going to go over all of the sites, but just give you a few to tell you sort of what we're thinking and hope to get you guys excited about all the things that we're planning. Then I'll also talk about some of the small projects that we've identified that we're hoping to start implementing this year. And then because this is a living document, it's a draft that is not final, we would love to hear your feedback. So we will leave you with a couple of questions for you to mull over and a way for you to give us that feedback. So Dave gave us a wonderful introduction of the primary theme that he and Brian developed, as well as the 4 main subject themes. But why do you need a theme? Well, themes are really, really important anytime you want to do any type of interpretation because they provide the framework for developing messages by capturing the essence of the most important concepts that you want to tell. They also help focus interpretive efforts and they link stories in meaningful ways. So they help, especially when you're doing a lot of small interpretive sites, having big themes really helps connect the dots so that you're telling a cohesive story. And they're also really useful for creating those actual displays and exhibits because they can be used as the foundation for creating all sorts of interpretive media. So we came up with the themes, and within those larger subject themes, there are a lot of smaller sub-themes that get a lot more specific, as well as different storylines. And all of those sub-themes and storylines, we're still refining. They are outlined in the draft. I won't share them today, but they will be put out for input once this version of the draft is complete. So within the document, there are outlined a bunch of different areas in Mary's Peak as sites for interpretation, and those are broken down into just 3 main areas. So the first area is what we'll call the Mary's Peak corridor, and that's the beautiful roadway after you turn off of Highway 31 onto Mary's Peak Road and you drive up to the Summit parking lot. So the sites we'll talk about today in the Mary's Peak corridor are all along that road as you drive up to the summit. The next area is the Summit parking lot itself, which in and of itself is a huge destination with lots of themes and interpretive opportunities. And then the last area is the final trail up to the summit, and then of course the summit itself. Now, if any of you wonderful audience members happen to attend the last Mary's Peak webinar, you may have heard our district ranger, Michelle Holman, talk about the plans to replace the communication tower up at the summit. And because those plans and the final implementation schedule will impact any interpretation or interpretive planning that might occur on the summit, and that won't be implemented for a while, and we're still waiting on the final plans for that. For the purposes of today, I'm just going to focus on the Mary's Peak corridor area and the Summit parking lot area. So when you're creating an interpretive plan and you are trying to figure out where you want to place interpretive displays or sites, there's a couple of considerations that you need to take into account. So first and foremost is safety, right? Is this a safe place for people to stop? If it's along a road, is there parking, and is there a natural safe barrier to protect pedestrians? Safety is always the first and foremost consideration. Something else you want to take into account is if there's existing infrastructure already in place. Does this site and the natural layout of the site lend itself to be a good interpretive spot? And another thing you want to consider is what type of impact would adding interpretation to a site have on the place itself, right? We want to make sure that anything we put in there does not negatively impact the site we're trying to interpret. Anytime you install an exhibit or a display, that's automatically naturally going to increase visitation to that site, because now, you know, there's a beautiful sign where once there wasn't anything before. So when you think about installing interpretation, you want to do it in a thoughtful way with thoughtful design to make sure that you're minimizing the impact of that increased visitation, and also making sure that you're maintaining the scenic integrity of the site, right? You don't want to put a big interpretive sign blocking a beautiful view, right? So making sure that it'll have minimal impact. And then, of course, you need to consider what stories you want to tell, right? What stories make the most sense to be told at that site to further the visitor's connection to the place, because that's the whole point of interpretation, right? And each of the locations should tie into the main subject themes that are developed in the plan. So those themes are physical themes, right? Stories that would be about geology, land formations, views, view sheds, weather, water. They could also tie into ecological themes, which are, you know, biological communities and requirements of life forms within a physical area. It could also tie to cultural themes, stories of human uses, understanding, and practices related to or directly on Mary's Peak. Or they could also tie to conservation and stewardship themes, right? Telling the story of purposeful methods to protect, maintain, or improve the physical, ecological, and cultural conditions of Mary's Peak. So all of those considerations when you're choosing a site. So let's start with our first area, which is the Mary's Peak corridor. So the first site along the Mary's Peak corridor that we've outlined in the plan as a place making a lot of sense for interpretation is what we're calling the welcome portal at the Alsea Summit. I'll go back to this slide so you can see the big map. The welcome portal is right at the bottom as you would turn off of Highway 34 right onto Mary's Peak. It's right at that first turnoff. This site has a huge amount of historical significance because it's a pass through the Coast Range that connects the Willamette Valley to the coast. It's also the site of the confluence of the homelands of both the Kalapuya and the Washeen people. So it's a very culturally important site. And also it's a site that has large existing infrastructure already in place. There's a huge paved parking lot with lots of room to accommodate cars. And there's also a protected corner in the southwest corner of the parking lot that is a logical place that would make sense to install a kiosk or an interpretive display. This also has the opportunity to be the first stop for hundreds of thousands of visitors that connect from the valley to the coast. And it just makes sense to have a really good spot for interpretation. So exhibits at this site, as you can see on the slide, here's Dave standing in that corner where we would think to put the interpretive kiosks. And that displays could include wayfinding information with maps to the summit, location of trailheads and trails along the route, also locations of bathrooms, because that's always a super important consideration for a lot of folks who are making that long drive from Corvallis all the way out to the coast or vice versa. It also would include the primary interpretation theme and some broad strokes introducing the other subject themes. It would include safety information and the Forest Service regulations for Mary's Peak. It would also include links to the Travel Oregon app, as well as the Mary's Peak website. And Travel Oregon has actually developed an audio tour of the scenic byway of Highway 34 that includes Mary's Peak. So this display could work in conjunction with that app. We'd also want to put a map of the scenic byway and include some other points of interest, as many people may come to this pull-off and decide that they don't want to drive all the way up to the top, but they want to know what other sites they could visit in the area. So first stop along the road, a wonderful site for interpretation and lots of opportunities here. The next site that we have outlined in the plan is called the Ridgeline Lookout Site. For those of you who were on the previous webinar, this is the site that overlooks the ecological thin that the BLM is currently implementing for restoration purposes. It has lots of existing infrastructure already. There's a large paved parking area, so lots of places for cars to park. And there's a lot of really neat things to interpret at this site. Behind the trees, there's views to the east across the Willamette Valley of Mount Jefferson, Three Sisters, Coburg Hills. To the west, there's views of the Coast Range. And then if you're at the pull-off and you turn around and you look across the road, there's a view of a basalt road cut wall that highlights a lot of really cool geological formations that make Mary's Peak so special. So at this place, you could talk about the physical themes of geology and the Coast Range origin, and you could also talk about conservation and tell the really important story of restoration, interpreting that ecological thin. And this site is about 2.6 miles up the road as you're driving towards the summit. So continuing along our journey up the road, our next stop is a hugely popular site, and this is Parker Creek Falls. Parker Creek Falls is 6.8 miles up the road, and it is an absolutely stunning waterfall that flows all year round. Right now, it is absolutely roaring. Dave and I did a site visit last week, and let me tell you, it is just breathtaking watching all of that water falling down the hill. There's also a weeping gabbro wall. Gabbro is that really hard rock that makes up the summit of Mary's Peak and is the reason why it's the tallest mountain in the Coast Range. And it's also, this place would be the first interpretive stop that's within the Scenic Botanical Special Interest Area land designation. At the site, there is a small paved turnout, so that can accommodate about 3 to 5 parked cars. And there is a curb that steps up to the sidewalk that separates the parking area from the place where pedestrians would view the waterfall. It's a hugely popular spot, but right now there's no signage describing what folks are seeing. So this would be a really wonderful place to put in some interpretation where you could talk about the themes of watersheds and the importance of Mary's Peak as a water source for all of the surrounding communities. So those are a couple of the stops along the road. So next I want to stop to focus on the Summit parking lot, which is a hugely popular spot and has a lot of different interpretive opportunities. At 3,750 feet elevation, the Summit parking lot is the highest point that you can drive to on Mary's Peak. And from the Summit parking area, visitors can hike up to the Mary's Peak main summit, or they can hike down the East Ridge Trail to Connors Camp, or the North Ridge Trail to connect to the Corvallis to Sea Trail at the Woods Creek Road. Visitors can also access the Meadow Edge Loop Trail to the Mary's Peak Campground and the connector trail, or the connector trails, which are the Summit Trail and the Tie Trail. Visitors can also experience all the wonders that Mary's Peak has to offer just from the location without further hiking through views, picnic tables, and other interpretive features at the site. There's restrooms up there, and there's many, many options and opportunities for different types of interpretive displays. The site is also very conducive to offering personal interpretive programs to visitors, as well as having many locations for potential displays that are safe, easily accessible, and already have existing infrastructures. So eventually, the goal for this site would be to offer a complete interpretive and recreational experience for visitors who are not able to go further or hike on the connected trail systems. But for now, we can't do everything at once, so we want to pick the easiest things to tackle first. And those two projects would be putting a wayfinding display right at the trailhead to the Summit Trail. So up here you can see our new fee station. This would be a good location to put a wayfinding sign with all the trails to the maps. Also, putting this wayfinding sign would help eliminate some of the user-made trails that are causing a lot of degradation to the fragile meadow ecosystem. So wayfinding sign. And then down on the right corner, you can see there's an empty display. And we would love to put in a peak viewfinder in this display. One of the things that makes the parking lot and Mary's Peak itself so special is that You can see so many spectacular views of all of the surrounding peaks going all the way out to the Cascades. And every time I'm up at the summit parking lot and it's a clear day and you can see the peaks, if I'm in uniform, somebody is always asking me what mountains they're looking at. So having an interpretive display that tells that story is something that we would love to have. So those are sort of some general ideas of different projects outlined in the interpretive plan. But next up, I want to turn to a couple smaller projects that we are hoping to get started on right away. These are projects we're trying to implement while we're finishing the interpretive plan. And the first of one is really exciting, but I'm going to actually turn it back to Dave, who's going to give you a little bit of background on behind it, because there is a really neat story that goes along with it.
Well, thank you. Appreciate it. Here we go. And beginning. All right. So Julia asked me to, because she's going to be talking about the creek, some of the creeks, and asked me to talk about how the indigenous naming of some of these creeks came about. So I'm going to briefly give you a thumbnail sketch of that. In May of 2016, through a conversation between Cultural Resources Manager David Harrelson of the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Run and myself, an idea was conceived to look at unnamed creeks on Mary's Peak, of which there's a lot of unnamed creeks, and look at some of them and see which may be culturally important, and ask the Confederated Tribes, the respective tribes, to if they were willing to name them. So this came about a discussion that of all the names of creeks and rivers on and around Mary's Peak, there's really only one that has an indigenous name, and don't even know why that was named that. I mean, there's no real history to it, the Tum Tum River, as you see in red. There is one other name in the lower left where my cursor is, Chinchimney, but that's, people thought that was an indigenous name, but it is it's a variant of an indigenous name that doesn't make any sense. So so the fact that this is such an culturally important point to various indigenous cultures, that the Mary's Peak is, that there's just no names that reflect it. All right. So why name? That was just part of our conversation. Why even name an unnamed tributary creek? And one is simply for identification. You don't want to call it Trib A, B, C, D, because there's no appreciation. I mean, something you call Trib A or Tributary A, it's hard to appreciate that. And people, to get humans' attention, you have to have a name. And then once there's appreciation, then there's the concept of protection. And we have seen this in times when a creek is named, all of a sudden it gets more protection, because people say, oh, I went up to this creek, and you have a name and you love it, and you don't want it to be ruined. So what David Harrelson suggested was that we hold a convening that of the respective tribes and of property owners. And he asked if the Mary's Peak Alliance would organize it and lead it, so it's not a government to government type of issue, because property owners are, many of them are the government, and the tribes are each a sovereign government. And so that if we ran it, it would have a more unofficial and less cumbersome management of it. So we did it. We held the first one at the Inahaw's Longhouse and at OSU on February 7th, 2017.
2017. Remember, the idea came out in May of 2016. So we held this initial convening in February of 2017. The purpose was essentially to gather input and interest. That was it. It wasn't to come up with any decisions of any kind, just what is everybody thinking? And a convening is a unique way of gathering input and hearing interests from everyone in an equal fashion. And the participants, I won't go into the names of the individuals, but the Confederated Tribes of the Siletz Indians, the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde, the U.S. Forest Service, Bureau of Land Management, City of Corvallis, which owns lands on Mary's Peak, Starker Forest, which owns lands on Mary's Peak, OSU, which owns land on Mary's Peak, and then Mary's Peak Alliance, which owns nothing. And we presented a map we came up with, showing various streams and making just an initial recommendation that these are kind of interesting in talking with various people, partners in advance. And we came up with, on the right, you can see some criteria. We said what watershed they're in and some basic information, who owns them, what their size is, and things like that. And so a convening, as mentioned, is special. It's a convening roundtable, which is what this was, starts with a question from a facilitator. And for the first one, the facilitator was Judy Juntanen from the Mary's Peak Alliance. And she would ask she had 3 questions. She asked one at a time. And what you do is individuals respond. Each individual around the table has time to respond one at a time, and they cannot be interrupted, and they're not supposed to replicate anything anybody else says or say, I side with this person, or I don't agree with that person. There's no agreement or disagreement. It's just saying what your answer is. And it goes around and around, and then people can continue. We go around and around until people are done talking about that question. And the results of a convening one was that 10 creeks were chosen to be named in the indigenous languages of the 3 local cultures of Mary's Peak, the Kalapuya, Washeen, and Yukon cultures. And the Confederated Tribes in the Grand Ronde and the Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians would work together to provide the 10 names. 6 of the names are in the Rock Creek watershed, 3 in the Parker Creek watershed, 1 in the Big Elk. And it was decided not to have any in the Shot Pouch Creek because we didn't have full compliance by property owners there. There are some wonderful creeks unnamed in the Shot Pouch Creek watershed. So the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde and Siletz met over that time period, and then we had a second convening after they were ready to make their presentation and would ask further questions in September of 2017 at the same place. And same participating organizations, but slightly different cast of participants because of who was available that particular day. And the results of convening number 2 was the names of the indigenous homeland languages be those tributaries within the Marys River watershed would be in the Kalapuya language. Those in the Alsea River would be in the Washeen language. Washeen is what the culture that we call now the Alsea. They call themselves the Washeen. So that's to honor them. It's the Washeen language. And the same with Yaquina. The people who are the Yaquina that we call the Yaquina culture call themselves Yukon. And so that's to honor them. So it's in those 3 languages by watershed. And there's the watersheds. And in the middle with the circle, that's the summit right here. And you see where the Marys River watershed is to the east and the north of the summit. That's Kalapuya homeland. And then coming off the west point and to the west toward Newport is the Yaquina or Yukon culture. And then to the south and southwest is the Washeen that we call the Alsea and watershed. Here's another rendition of it with a closer picture of the summit. And then this very interesting, these are all maps that the Forest Service just made. Dee Olson, herpetologist there, had them made because she found that that newts are unique to each, different types of species, subspecies of newts are unique to each watershed. And so she needed these delineations. This is the summit, this is the east summit, here's the middle summit, and here's West Point right here. So there's 4 summits on Mary's Peak. And so you can see how that works out from the summit. So the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Run will name the 6 Marys River watershed creeks in the California language, and the Siletz, Confederated Tribes of Siletz Indians will name, decided to name the 3 Washeen creeks in the Alsea River and 1 in the of the Yacon language in the Yaquina River that all come down from the near the summit. And it was decided at the summit that the Mary's Peak Alliance will produce the naming proposal document and submit it to the Confederated Tribes and the major property owners and related government institutions for review. So we, as the Mary's Peak Alliance, did all that and then submitted it and got a lot of good positive feedback, and really helped it a lot. And then following that, when we got partner agreement, we submitted the proposal to the Oregon Geographic Names Board, which is a board of 27 state-appointed people to review and vote on whether the names would be accepted or not. And here's a map just sort of showing where they are. The summits are up here. You see where it says 4 summits of Mary's Peak, and red is the main summit. Here's the east, middle summits, and here's West Point. And you can see essentially or approximately where they are. And here are the property owners with the but not the Mary's Peak Alliance. Here's that map again. And so I think, let's see, let me go forward. Yeah, we're going to look, hold on, I gotta, oops, did I? Huh. Uh-oh, how do I go backwards here? Huh, it's only going forwards. Hold on just a second. I gotta get out of the full screen here and go back a little bit. Got ahead of myself. All right. So we're what we're going to do is go up the Mary's Peak Road from Connors Camp. See, if you see where my cursor is here next to where it says Powent Creek, that's Connors Camp right there. And so the first one, Powent Camp. Powent is Washeen for cinnamon bear. That's a black bear that's cinnamon color. You can see up by the name at the top. And so Powent Creek, the headwaters is right there by the road. And but we all drive or ride right past it and never see it. And there's the headwaters right where it crosses the road. It's so beautiful, and it's very small, but it gets very large later on. It's a very long creek, and it's a lot of waterfalls on it. The next one up, you go up about another, I don't know, 2/3 of a mile, and it's Lawahayu Creek, and that crosses Mary's Peak Road. But again, you don't see much at the road because it all picks up, the quantity of water picks up just downstream of the road. And it's one big waterfall between Mary's Peak Road and all the way down to Harlan Road. It's just spectacular, impenetrable, I might say too. The next one is Washeen Creek, named after the Washeen people. Oh, Lawahayu, I didn't tell you, that means high mountain. That may have been what the Washeen people called Mary's Peak, is Lawahayu. It's not verified, but there's a good chance that's what it was called. And that's why the Siletz chose that name. Washeen is the name of the people. It's the first thing in the geographic lexicon named after the Washeen people in their own language. And so that's only like a 1/4 mile up from Lawahayu crossing. And look at this. I mean, here's our interpretive guides the first time we saw it, and it's just 50 feet off the road, and we were all in awe. You're only seeing our backs, but we were all in total awe of what we saw. And you can see that's me at one of the areas to the left, and then another little waterfall here. It's just a beautiful series of waterfalls. And then if you go up another, I don't know, half a mile or more, you come to Parker Creek, which all of you know. And just want to make sure you know that. There it is again. So now we're moving out of the Washeen watershed into the Yacone watershed, which is on the west side of West Point. And there up in the left, you see in the red box is the Yacone Creek, where it comes off of West Point, crosses the road, and goes down to just spectacular waterfalls back in the woods there. Just fantastic place. And that's the first thing named in the correct spelling after the Yacone people also. So moving over to the Calapooya, these are off the road now. So I have these in green, light green, and Osney Creek, the headwater of Osney Creek almost touches the headwaters of Pawent Creek. And that's the watershed divide in the blue arrows there. And it's pretty impressive going to the two headwaters, how close they are. And Osney means coyote. And it flows into the South Fork of Rock Creek. I'm not going to go into any detail on the rest of them, but Amalint is in the Corvallis watershed, and it means wolf. And Onquatqua Creek, that's frog in the Calapooya. Onhoots is cougar. Ashayum is the grizzly bear. And just imagine being there in 1840 when there were grizzly bears up there and wolves. I mean, you were up there living with them. And Ongingin is interesting that Grand Ron shows it as the lowest level creek is Ongingin. And so remember, they flow into Rock Creek, and essentially means flint or rock. And so these names were submitted with a very long document justifying everything. And the geographic boards on October 2018 came out, not everyone, but a significant number with members of the Grand Ron and Siletz and the Mary's Peak Alliance and Forest Service. And we went up to Mary's Peak and looked at the streams. They wanted to justify that, in their mind, it was justified naming, and they came back having a great time, and we're very excited. We did some public outreach through the Oregonian, the Gazette Times, and the Corvallis Advocate. Good, nice long articles. And on OPB, David Miller's Think Out Loud. David Harrelson and I were interviewed on there, and that was a lot of fun. And then the Mary's Peak Alliance and the Mary's Peak Group held a total of 8 events promoting the naming of the creeks and outreach. And these organizations provided letters of support. So we really went through a lot of effort. We wanted to make sure there was inclusivity in this. So you see the tribal members, the government partners, I mean, not members, but partners, and the agencies of municipalities and counties and university and just a large organizations, just a very large group. So we're very excited about this level of support. Went in June 15th, 2019, before all 27 people down in Roseburg, Oregon. They had their quarterly meeting down there. All 27 voted unanimously and wholeheartedly yes. And so that was very exciting. And so then it was sent to the USGS, and very quickly they approved it, and within 2 months, all those creek names were on the map. So from the conception of May 2016 to October 2019, it all happened, and here we are. And take it away, Julia.
All right, thanks, Dave. Yeah, so the reason I asked Dave to give us that wonderful introduction of the story behind the naming of the creeks is because one of the the first proposed projects we're hoping to do this year is to install signage for 4 of the tribally named creeks that cross Mary's Peak Road. So that would be Pawint, Loahayu, Washeen, and Yukon Creek, as well as adding a sign for Parker Creek Falls because there's currently no signage there. The signs would be simple point of interest signs in the traditional sort of brown and white Forest Service style, although the exact signage has not been determined, but these are some photos to give you kind of an idea of what they would look like. And we would put one on each side of the road so that visitors both driving up to the summit and driving back down could see the names and be reminded of the history and the heritage and the cultural importance of the people who were here first and continue to steward these lands today. So that's one of the projects that we're hoping to implement this year. That's part of the interpretation plan, sort of as a nice finish line to that wonderful process of naming the creeks. The next project that we're hoping to implement this year is putting up a protective barrier of the for the sensitive rock garden that's on the summit of Mary's Peak. One of the reasons why Mary's Peak is a scenic botanical special interest area is because of this really fragile ecosystem that makes up the rock garden up at the summit. It's an absolutely spectacular site, especially in about a month when everything's going to start blooming. And it's great because you can see it because it's right there on the side of the trail. But because it's so close to the trail, it also leaves it very, very vulnerable to being trampled on by recreators who are exploring off trail or are tempted to climb on those rocks that look very climbable. So we're hoping, and we've been wanting to for a number of years, to put up some sort of barrier to try to keep folks on the trail so that they can view the beautiful landscape from the trail and not destroy the fragile ecosystem. So what we're hoping to do is 2 parts of this project. One part would be a buck and rail side fence that would go alongside the right side of the trail. And then along the left side or the view shed side would be some smaller, lower to the ground boulders with signs. And I'll show you what that's going to look like. So the buck and rail fence, Dave and I went through a bunch of different options and I did a lot of research on styles of fences that might work and that would maintain the scenic integrity of the area. And we came up with the buck and rail fence idea because it was the best option for a non-intrusive, no-dig fence that has high stability and is frequently used in really difficult terrains. When we were exploring different fence ideas, we were running into the challenge of the soil composition at the summit of Mary's Peak. There's only about 2 inches of soil before you hit that hard rock gabbro, which can be very difficult if you're trying to install a fence that needs to be drilled into the ground. So this buck and rail design, sometimes referred to as a jackleg fence, is a really great option to be able to provide a protective barrier that will keep visitors off of the sensitive habitat while still maintaining stability and also not minimizing the impact to the ground itself. We'd also use natural materials and a design which complies with the visual standards for the special interest area land designation. And because the fence would be on the right side of the trail, it would blend into the sloping background and not obstruct the beautiful view shed, so that would maintain the scenic integrity. But if any of you have been up to the summit, you know that the left side of the trail that has the beautiful views also has a very sensitive habitat below the trail in those beautiful meadows. That rock garden does extend down the hill. So we'd like to put something there to try to encourage visitors to keep off of those fragile meadows and stay on the trail. But we need to come up with something that's not going to obstruct that beautiful view shed. So running into the same challenge of very thin soil and a challenge of putting anything into the ground, we came up with the idea of placing strategically placed low to the ground boulders along the edge of the trail in a few different areas that would have signs mounted on them, encouraging visitors to keep off of the fragile landscape and stay on the trail. I'll go back a few slides just so you can see exactly where we're hoping to put them. The section of the fence will run about 300 feet along the side of the trail, and then there'll be 4 strategically placed small boulders along the side. So hopefully not enough to create any obstruction or decrease the scenic integrity, but be enough of a presence to discourage visitors from wandering off the trail. So those are 2 of the projects we're working on. Next, I'm going to turn it over to my boss, Matt Ramick, who's our wonderful recreation program manager for Siuslaw National Forest here in Walport on the Central Coast Ranger District. And he's going to tell you about one of our projects to take care of this user-made trail up to the east summit of the peak. Take it away, Matt.
All right, thank you. Good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Yes, I've been working out of Walport for about 2 years now. Kind of got into the whole Mary's Peak information and kind of, steeped in the history and everything about it. Probably within the first couple months that I started working out of Walport. And so along the way, basically, I was told about this user-made trail to the east summit, right as you get out of the parking lot. And, I saw firsthand how, folks could mistake it for the west summit, for, thinking that was your final destination, all those miles driven, this is where you needed to go. And, there were some signs, on each side of it that we had placed, but, a lot of folks just wouldn't really read those. And they would just go around it and, make their way up to this east summit. While some of the more seasoned folks, or just knowing that there could be maybe something more, they went on the road and up to the west summit. So what I understood was our botanist came to me and was letting me know that there was a plan through the NEPA documentation, the EA, the environmental assessment that had been done for the Bonneville Power Administration Tower, the communication tower that's on the west summit, that in there was some talk or understanding that this would be rehabilitated and basically taken away for folks hopefully not to use anymore, as going right up the side of the slope. It's horrible in terms of when rain happens, it just starts runnels and different incising into the landscape, and then denudes it of any vegetation, and it's really hard to reestablish. And even when it was trying to reestablish, people were still walking on it right when you were kind of not seeing the trail as well. So aside from also trying to protect this very unique vegetation that's up on Mary's Peak, we also wanted to provide the cultural aspect of it all still to the tribes and other folks who revere this area as culturally sensitive, to get there as well. So we couldn't just take it all out, rehabilitate it, and then call it good. We were also tasked with figuring out a way to create a more non-user made trail, an official Forest Service trail that would basically come from the left, the tree area, to go did the
I'm sorry, I got kicked out of the Zoom for just a moment and then it stopped sharing my screen, but I am back on board.
Okay, awesome.
You froze for a moment and I wasn't sure if it was me or you. So
I'm glad we got it going.
I'm back here.
I need this visual. I gotta have this visual.
Sorry.
So the Forest Service trail would be coming out from the trees to the left, more up on the hillside, and almost to the other, where the trees kind of dive back into the trail itself that kind of goes along on the east slope. So we had my trails crew basically went out and they marked kind of a preliminary route that could go up to the top. And, you know, one of the main things we wanted to do was hopefully kind of tuck it away kind of further to the south, so that if people were standing up there, they would be hard to see. So people would just, you know, again, just use that one area, the path of least resistance to get up there, and then we'd have that problem again. So with that in mind, we went a little bit further back, and again, we're trying to still provide the area for people, but in a more official way, and again, in a way that won't hurt the vegetation around it. Now, to also kind of help visually strengthen not using this user-made trail, on each side where the trail would be rehabilitated and then kind of tie in with the road, we would put up, again, that kind of J-leg buck and rail type of fence that Julia was talking about, protecting the rock garden. And then also have a kind of a, you know, almost kind of a, not like a strict enforcement type of sign, but more of like, as one of my landscape counterparts said, as we were doing some work up there, you know, kind of say like the summits this, the west summits this way, and yes, we're not joking or anything, something like that. Light, but also still letting them know that this is just the east summit, and that the one that they're really looking for is further up the road. And of course, we'll have better interpretation, maybe better kiosk displays that we would put next to the automated feed machine that you saw in one of the slides, and as well as that feed tube. So yeah, that's kind of where we're at. And again, as Julia and Dave were kind of saying, with a lot of what we're talking about right now, it's still all in the planning stages. You know, this is still being discussed, and then of course talked about, where, you know, something might not work along the way. So we're still in the planning phase and not so much into the implementation phase. So again, as I just kind of outlined everything, this is kind of what has gone on up until now. And of course, things could change, you know, over the summer, or just due to any unforeseen thing that we, you know, kind of run into sometimes when talking about creating a new trail, or, you know, rehabilitating another trail. So yeah, I think that is basically what I wanted to cover in terms of this user-made trail reroute restoration kind of thing. So I'll hand it back to, I believe, Julia. Okay.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt. And sorry again for that snafu. My computer decided to kick me out of the meeting for a moment. So that was an exciting moment for all of us.
That gave me a start.
Yeah. But yeah, so as Matt mentioned, you know, all of these projects, we're hoping that we can bring these into a reality. But they will, all of them, you know, are in the process of the NEPA process that does require a lot of review from our specialists, and is a process. So we will continue to be as transparent as we can, but we are hoping to bring these into reality as soon as we possibly can. So those are some of the projects we're working on now to try to hope make a reality soon. But as I mentioned, you know, this plan is a draft, and we are in the process of reviewing it and finalizing it. I saw in the Q&A that we do have some questions about parts of the draft, which hopefully we'll have time to address. But I would love to give you a chance to give me your input, because, you know, a lot has changed since 2019, and it's been a while since the community has had a chance to tell us what stories and what things you want to see in an interpretation program on Mary's Peak. So we have a couple questions. You don't have to give me that response now. I left my email up on the screen, and I can put it in the chat as well. We would love to hear from you. The answer to these two questions: what stories would you like to see told on Mary's Peak? What's important to you? And in what format would you like to see these stories told? Would you like to see physical displays, in-person interpretive programs, brochures, virtual apps, media? What form is your favorite type of interpretation? Any input you could give us, we would love to hear from you, because this is your plan as much as it is ours. And, Mary's Peak is such a treasured place. We want to make sure that we're doing it right. So without further ado, I think it's time for our Q&A to get started. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I will turn it back to Bonnie, who I think is going to lead us through.
Thank you. Thanks, Julia. And that was amazing. What a really fascinating presentation. Thank you all. Matt, if you want to join us too, please do. We do have a few questions, like Julia said. So Cameron asked, this was, Julia, when you were talking about the Mary's Peak corridor, so interpretive sites there. Cameron asked, why not include Connors Camp?
Yeah, so we do have Connors Camp in the current draft, which I probably should have mentioned earlier, that the sites I just chose a couple specific sites I wanted to highlight. In the current draft of the plan itself, there are a whole host of other sites that are outlined. In the final draft, likely how it will be formatted is putting the priority sites first in the main body of the plan, but then including all of those other sites in an appendix or an attached supporting document, because we want to make sure that the plan itself is usable and not overwhelming, but we also want to make sure we include all of those other interpretive opportunities. So I can tell you now that yes, Connors Camp, and also I saw I think the West View is also, they're both included in the plan. But I'll leave my email in the chat. If you have other places that are really important to you, please send those to me so that I can, take that into consideration to see if they're not already included in the version that we have right now. But thank you for that question.
Great, thanks. This is also related to so this might be included in the plan too for interpretive sites. Someone asks, have you thought about including the Woods Creek Trailhead and or the North Ridge Hike for interpretation sites? I've accessed Mary's Peak as often via that route as the main road.
Yeah, I would say the same answer. That I'll send me all those names so that we can make sure. I will say, there's a lot of land ownership. Mary's Peak is a patchwork, right, of Forest Service and BLM, and there's a lot of different routes and ways to get up to some of those connecting trails. So any place where we are going to be installing physical interpretive displays, it's easiest for us to implement if it is on Forest Service land. I am still getting to know a lot of the trail systems of Mary's Peak, so I don't want to embarrass myself by saying that something is not on forest land when it is. But that's just something that we have to take into consideration and double check. But yes,
Yeah.
Dave, go ahead.
Yeah, if I can add to that is there's also prioritization.
Yeah.
And so, to put, if we're talking about interpretive displays, there's a lot of background to go into that and each one individually. So we have to look at not only finances, but like Julia said, the permitting, the process you have to go through. And so we have to prioritize what's going in first, what's going in second, what's going in 63rd. So the plan looks at a long range and very wide range. And to the point that it's almost too much. But we want to look way down the line to see what, so this is sustainable. So there has to be prioritization. And so I think Julia picked up on some of the priorities to get in place first. Then we can keep plugging away, getting all these places. Yeah, I mean, I think we would all like interpretation either in ground or with people or virtually with apps, with pings when you go by it, whether it's on a trail or a road. Yeah.
But this is great feedback for us
It
too,
is.
because I'm still fairly new to the area, and this is your community, right? You are the folks who know and love and have spent your lives on this peak. So we want to make sure that we're not missing something that is really important and is a high priority for folks too.
Great. Thank you very much. Kathy has a few questions. Let's see if we can work through them. Number one, will interpretation mention that the Kalapuya have a traditional memory of the glacial Missoula floods driving the people to the top of Mary's Peak?
I would say that will be in something, whether it's on a display or whether it's on an app or whether it's on a website or whether it's on a brochure. Yeah, that's a critical story. And
Thank you.
all that is to be determined. Yeah,
Sure.
and whenever anything mentions in any way or infers in any way any of the indigenous cultures, that will not only need to be approved, but really should come directly from the indigenous cultures. I mean, we want to make sure that we're not being colonial on this.
And that's something too, we are working with the tribes too,
Right.
is to identify which stories they want to be told and which
Right,
stories
right.
maybe they don't want to be told as well. And then working with them when it comes to developing the specific interpretive content, once we get to making the displays, that making sure that the stories are coming from them.
Great. Are there also plans to extend the Thai Trail into a mid-elevation trail around the peak? Does that sound familiar to anybody?
Yeah, I know a little bit about that, and yeah, that would be a long-term one that crosses many properties, some of them private.
I see. And then finally, will you ever reopen access to the top of the lower summit?
I think that's referring to the East Summit.
Oh, I see. Okay.
I think
Thank
that's
you.
what the reference. So Matt really covered that, I think.
Gotcha. Appreciate it. Thank you. Someone asked, will the creek signage have any room to explain the history and cultural meaning of the names that were chosen?
So for these particular signs, likely not, since we are hoping to have them as something that can be viewed from the car. Because the placement of some of these creeks are not necessarily conducive to being a stop for pedestrians. There's one of the sites has a nice pull off for people to get out, but the other two, at the point where the creek crosses, there really is no safe place for people to get out. And when you're designing a sign to be seen from a car, you want to make sure that it's simple enough and you don't want to put too much language in there just to make it easier to read. So likely those explanations would follow in other interpretive displays nearby or on the peak, because we would want to make sure to include that information. But for those specific signs themselves, it would just be the names.
Yeah, and it's a great question, and I think that there's a number of things we can do, some of which Julia already mentioned. It was other signage, other places where it's safe. We can tie it all together. But also, we really do want to start using apps. I don't use apps. I'm too old to do that. But I mean, but we do want to use apps. So when you're going by something, it'll ping. If you have the app on, it'll ping. And if you want to hear it, you can hear about it. So you can hear something, and it's not diverting your eyes away from the road, which can be quite dangerous. So yeah, there's a lot of ways we can do it, but I think Julia handled the sign.
And that just speaking of what Dave was just mentioning too, Travel Oregon did develop an app, an audio tour of Highway 34 that is geo-referenced. So you don't actually need to be connected to the internet for it to work. And what it does is you start it when you're in service, and then as you're driving, it starts when it hits all of those points. So that could be another opportunity for creating something like that up the Mary's Peak Road that would include further explanations of those signs.
Great. And David suggests QR codes on the signs to link to the app as a possible idea.
Yeah.
Julia, do you mind putting your email in the chat for everyone? I think someone would like that if you don't mind. And then Mary asks, is there a way to obtain the new map with the creek names on it at this time? Or will there be?
Well, by the new map, I assume she means a real map, not what I showed on the in my PowerPoint. That was me on PowerPoint. You know,
Sure.
the US GS maps, and probably, I don't know, I assume the Forest Service maps already have them on. I haven't looked at the Forest Service maps.
I don't know if there's an, Matt, is there an updated one since 2019? I don't
Good
know.
question.
It
The
was-
last one I know of was 2017, but I don't know.
Yeah,
But the USGS maps will
Hmm.
all have it on it. And then generally it trickles down to whenever people make a new map, you know, and that's not a small task. But yeah, sorry, I don't have one at my fingertips, but yeah, go on USGS and look it up, and I think you'll see one there. We should have one. Let's make an effort to find that. And,
and
thank
that's
you.
part of the reason why we wanted to do the sign project too, is to get those names on the ground and, you know, and
Right.
so people can know about them while we're waiting for new maps.
Great, thank you. Paul asked, and I can actually answer this, Paul. Yes, this was covered. We did, they did talk about the towers at our previous webinar. Isn't that right, Dave? That was
Yes,
pretty
yeah,
well
yeah.
covered.
Yeah, it was in the
So,
second one. Yeah.
so in the chat, look for that second webinar, Transforming Mary's Peak. There's a link to the video, and you'll get a lot more information about that. And then there's a question from someone who I think is just expressing that they don't care so much for the firing range. Is the firing range included in any way in the long-term plan, or are there any plans for it or anything like that?
That's BLM property.
Oh, I see.
You need
Okay.
to talk to
Gotcha.
BLM that, you know,
Gotcha.
and then it's more than just the sound. There's a lot of destruction of some very important geological formations. That's probably one of the best formations of pillow basalt in the United States. That's being really riddled with high-powered rifles right now, and it's not a good thing.
Yeah, sounds like it can be a little jarring at times.
At BLM.
Well, thank you. Thanks for letting us know that. Someone asked, so they say that I happened to use the Gaia GPS app, and they looked at the USGS layer, and the creek names are not on it at this time.
Really?
So I wanted to
Huh,
mention that.
that's interesting. Huh. There's some USGS maps that have it on because it was sent to me, you know, and but I've never looked into it, so good.
And that was all the questions that we had for tonight. So thank you so much, Julia, Dave, Matt, for your time. It was really interesting. I
Sure.
learned so much, as I always do. I've learned so much through this series about Mary's Peak, and I really appreciate it. And I really appreciate the work that all of you do for the Peak. So thank you. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And Bonnie, we really appreciate you and the library doing all this work that none of us want to do. You know, like host the technology. You know,
Right.
thank you so much. And to host it. And so all these, as you said, will be eventually on YouTube.
Yes.
But in the meantime, everybody who's registered will get this sent to them. So
Yes, and feel
Great.
free if you want to email that link to other people, like share it as much as you like, and it will show up on the library's YouTube page, and it will be human captioned, so it'll get an improved transcript. It won't just be the computer generated one that will initially go out for folks.
with all the wrong words. Yeah.
Yeah. Great.
Well, thank you
All right.
all. Thanks for all the work and everybody participating. We email Julia with your
Yeah,
input.
definitely.
Okay. All right.
All right. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Take
Thank
care.
you.
See
Bye-bye
you
now.
next time. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.